Ah,
While Jamil's working on that, how about I go ahead and get started with some of the kind of preliminary sort of things? And I'll just get started by giving a very quick introduction. For those of you who don't know me, and I do recognize a lot of the names and faces, my name is Jim Dimmick, and I'm a professor in the Department of Communication Studies. It's been my really great pleasure to have been here at Minnesota State and in the Mankato community now for almost 20 years, my family and I. And in that time, I've gotten to know a lot of the names and faces that have been part of progressive movements and activists in and around the Mankato area. And when working with this group, we went looking for names, not just of people who are active, but of young activists in particular. The name that really consistently kept coming back to us was, you got to talk to Anisa Omar. And that there's really sort of a sense in which, Anisa has made a really tremendous impact, or at least made her presence felt. How about that, on the Mankato scene here? And we are really excited to have Anisa join us today, not just because of her presence here in the Mankato community, but also because Anisa is a student here at Minnesota State University. And so, I would like to begin with a kind of great clap. Welcome, Anisa, and thanks really for being here today. It's been a real pleasure to kind of like see you at so many events, but this is the first time I think we're going to have a conversation. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Anisa Omar. I'm currently finishing up my last semester here at Minnesota State University, Mankato. Background information, I was born and raised here in Mankato, and decided to stick around for university. I whenever people ask me to introduce myself, I'm like, when it comes to that. But I'm majoring in political science with a minor in ethnic studies. I'm hoping to go into law school this fall semester, fingers crossed with the LSAT that's coming up here in March. But outside of schoolwork, I organize with different organizations, the main one being Ignite the Youth, which is designed for the youth by the youth. I can't speak today. We created that this summer after witnessing how not involved the youth were when we would go to speaking engagements or demonstrations in regard to what happened after the murder of George Floyd. Our voice was missing. And so we decided to create this to help amplify the voices of those from marginalized communities, especially. The lead organizers are BIPOC youth. Most of us went to high school here or are currently going into high school here. We have student ambassadors that we currently organize with, and we work with parents and all of that. Right now, we're doing a campaign called Police Free Schools. It's to help create an equitable school environment for Black and Brown youth, because we know when police are in schools, we see higher suspension rates, we see individuals falling through the cracks and being introduced into the criminal justice system. And so how can we utilize those funds for programs that are more effective, such as restorative justice practices, after school programming, and mentoring and tutoring services. We currently are organizing for a few community conversations that are coming up soon by the school district, and so we're kind of preparing for that. But outside of that, I also organize with the Mankato Area Voices for Racial Equity, and that is a place where marginalized community members can share their stories. Well, anybody basically can share their stories, but it was set with the intention that we would amplify the voices of those from marginalized communities, share their experiences with the police department in Blue Earth County and Nicollet County, as well as the educational system in Blue Earth County with the Mankato Area Public School System. I'm also currently organizing, I think this is a list, with the YWCA, with the Mankato Area Youth Project. It's a space for BIPOC students currently going there, and it's just for BIPOC students. We do trap and paint, where we listen to music and we paint, and we just kind of create that space for Black and Brown youth. And then I'm also a board member with the YWCA.
So when you were saying you didn't really quite know what to say about yourself, it sounds like you didn't know how to narrow it down, Anisa. And no, that really is, and I find that that if you're hoping that as you continue to be an activist and organizer, that people will like eventually stop asking you to serve and represent on boards and come to things like this, I can assure you that's not going to happen. That you find the more involved you get, the more involved you get. Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
So what you mentioned George Floyd and as a kind of like genesis of Ignite the Youth, but what is like your starting point? Like what made you personally say, I need to be in it, not on the sidelines?
Honestly, what introduced me into activism, I would say, would be serving as student body president last year. Being able to advocate for students who look like me, being able to sit with administrators and say, this is an issue. And honestly, a turning point would be I would have monthly meetings with the vice president of diversity and inclusion,
Mm-hmm.
who would always tell me, oh, this is what we're working on, and like bring national like studies like this has been showcased to not work, and we see it in our university, and that truly gave me a jump start. Like I would go into meetings with other administrators like, we need to solve this, or we need to make sure we are addressing this type of issue. I think that's where my starting point was. I was doing that with state legislators, federal legislators, and so forth, and so I really loved that feeling, and I really loved advocating for individuals who look like me. And then seeing everything this summer, I was just kind of doing classes when everything kind of popped up. I was doing summer courses, and I'm like, I can't sit on the sidelines. Like I need to be involved in some format.
Did you find that because you already were kind of visible as a leader, you have this role as student body president, you've been like, people knew your name, right? That when then kind of things were kind of, I don't want to say blowing up because that makes it seem like things were more riotous than they were. I felt things like were maybe too calm. But right, did you find that, was it that you felt like, hey, I've got the skills, so I need to step up and lead? Or did you find people were saying, we need a leader, and they pushed you to the front?
Um, Honestly, it was like my life depended on it. Like it wasn't, oh, like people are contacting me, so I should speak up. It's like, people who look like me or my brother could be murdered at any second. I don't have the privilege, nor do I have the ability to sit down quietly. Like my survival is dependent on me advocating for myself and for people who look like me. And that's truly, even finishing the summer courses, like before what happened with George Floyd, and like close to finals, like May 8th, around there, I was contacting the school district because I'm like, oh, I'm noticing all these new policies. Like, how are you guys framing it to be more equitable? So I was already dealing with like school stuff before even finishing my term as student body president.
Mm-hmm.
But it was truly, I don't have the ability to like pick and choose, and I want to be involved. Like this is my survival, and I need to advocate for that.
That is really in so I did have some other questions, but you've kind of led me to kind of move to this idea of your story is a little bit of like kind of very traditional legislative action. You want to be involved, you run for office, you get elected, you talk to people in other leadership positions, right? And then it changed, right? Then it's a different kind of activism. How is protest, how is dissent, how is kind of popular reaction, like how is that different for you? Like, does my question make sense? Is it too
Yeah,
broad?
no, it makes sense. Um, Honestly, I view protest as being next step, like in organizing. It's like we up in Minneapolis, we were doing the conversations and so forth behind the scenes, and it gets to a point where talking anymore isn't working. We need to go into some form of direct action, and so that's how I kind of view protest. I don't know if I'm really answering it, but it's what is, even with the school organizing, like we sent a petition, we sent this, it's like elevated, but after a Black body is killed out in the street like that, it's kind of, you're already at that heightened level. I don't.
But I think that for a lot of people, like who saw some of the protests in the street, like for a lot of people, they were like, and I'm and in particular, I'm talking about suburban white communities, for whom, violence on bodies of color isn't part of their lived experience. For them, it was like, why all of a sudden people like, why didn't you try writing a letter to the editor first? Like, like, did you find that you were getting that response from people, in particular from like white moderate progressives, who are like, we support you, but just back up? Did you get that?
Yeah, I see that currently right now with what we're organizing with school resource officers. It's don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, why are you guys doing it? Like, in my experience, the school resource officers are amazing and so forth, and we need to fix these before we get to this. Like, you're asking for such a big change in such a short amount of time. I see that a lot. I see like, how dare you ask or make, even from school board members, private meetings with school board members, it's how dare you make these demands to remove resource officers. Like, change takes time, and that whole narrative of slow progress, like we need to go step at a time. And I'm not willing to settle for small incremental changes at this point with the school district. It's either this or more Black and brown students are going to be falling through the cracks at your hands.
Would you consider a small incremental change a win and still keep fighting for the big change? Or if you were offered a small incremental change, would you say no?
Right now we're hearing, why not just remove one of the officers from the middle school? And we're like, no, it's past time. We're not willing to negotiate or settle for that because we know what could happen. Like, there's a bigger win at stake. And so I'm not a fan of that form of incremental change. Like, we'll remove this while we leave these two where they're at. But I do think small wins can lead to a big win. But in our case, we're not asking for something small.
So, in terms of, there are those voices who I think, and I'm not talking about necessarily white voices per se, or even, and I'm certainly not talking about the political right. I'm talking about your moderates. I'm talking about people who identify as progressive and even leftist, who want to put the whole protest movement now on the back burner. They're like, Joe Biden's our candidate. We need to rally around our guy here and elect the progressive or the more progressive candidate to office. And when you go out and demonstrate and you go out and take to the streets like that, and you say, you're making all of us progressives look bad, you hurt our cause, what do you say to those folks? I don't agree with them, by the way. I just want to know I want to know how you would respond.
We take to the streets, we make their progressiveness look bad, or their progressive candidate look bad.
Yeah.
Honestly, I haven't engaged with people at that level yet.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of like the lesser of two evils. Like, I am at a viewpoint where I do not think our liberation, Black liberation, will come from electoral politics. And I do see a lot of people framing it like that when we do, as of now, criticize policies and plans put forth by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We do get that blowback, like, how dare you talk about that? Like, she's the first woman of color with such a big nomination and so forth. But I think we do have every right to critique their plans, critique the harms that they have caused. And if you are not willing to stand beside Black and brown individuals, criticizing them and still protesting and taking to the streets, I honestly would say you need to reevaluate who you identify as and where you think you're going. As nice as possible, obviously.
You would say that as nicely as possible, but well, when do you feel like you need to stop being nice? What makes you stop being nice?
I right now, I don't think the school board finds me being too nice at this point, but I don't like, I always like, you know, have gotten the angry Black woman and all of that when I get called aggressive when I'm very direct or I'm being assertive. And so I don't have an issue letting you know how it is. I'm very nice when I ask the first 2 times. Uh, the third time, probably not so nice. But I still do see myself considering how white people are feeling about it. Like, oh, maybe I shouldn't say it like that. But I don't have the option to consider how they're feeling when it's literal Black bodies on the line. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, I think you're answering the questions. I thought you've answered all the questions wonderfully. Just not that my opinion means anything in that, but I want to ask you a little bit more about being a young organizer a little bit. How do you see and here, I don't want you to feel like you have to speak for every young person who's an activist. But in your experience, what's the relationship between young people who are out there trying to, get involved, and older people who are out there getting involved?
Sorry, what was that? I missed
What's the
it.
relationship between young activists and old activists?
Um,
You see me
I
at the demonstration. I see you at the
Yeah,
demonstration.
I
Yeah.
do see a lot of miscommunication or like different where our stances are different. Even with Black community leaders here who are older, the
Mhm.
way in which they approach us young Black youth,
Mhm.
it's like, how dare you ask for stuff like this? You need to be very gentle when you're approaching certain white individuals or when you're approaching the Mankato Police Department. You can't go in like that. I think that's a lot of like their fears speaking. Like, we can't be rude to the individuals. Like, we need to play nice with them. I do see us being bypassed and our ideas being taken a lot. Especially with like the school resource officers thing, we see a lot of different organizations now talking about it, or now trying to take over and like make less demands, like, oh, just remove the one from the middle school and leave like the 2 high school ones in. um, and it's easy to do that. I've noticed, like, it's easy for them to take our ideas and not take us with it. It's like, we will package it, but we're not going to include you, we're not going to work with you. And so I see us being, even the school leaders, school board members, when we decided to partner with the local NAACP chapter, they automatically were like responded back to right away. They were offered to meet with the equity consultant and with different individuals. And we are like, we've been asking for this for like a long time. And so it's very easy for them to bypass us or ignore us. And the disconnect is a lot of fear-based. Like, we can't go in that manner.
Yeah, I always try, because I've done a lot of work with radical movements, and have also not, but felt like we did a lot of legwork and then we weren't invited to to the conversation. And there is a sense in which I try to chalk those up as like little mini wins, like, well, we moved them a little bit to the scale, even though we didn't get to participate in it. But at the same time, that can also be super demoralizing, right? To feel like you put in all of this legwork, to feel like you put in all this energy, and then to have like, then it's making the free press, right? And then the story's being told, and it's all these other people who are doing. How do you first of all, I want to know how you keep your own kind of like energy and enthusiasm up when stuff is like snatched away from you like that. That's my first question.
Um, Honestly, I don't know how I myself I keep it up. I'd say a lot of venting, like
Yeah.
me and other lead organizers, like, can you believe this now? Like, that helps a lot.
Mhm.
But honestly, as you mentioned, small wins, as long as they're talking about it, we're
Mhm.
fine with it. But it's also, at times, you see the refusal of other organizations not wanting to work with you, but taking your ideas. Um, but honestly, I'm too busy organizing that I don't really have the time to harp on it too much. Like, I have other things that I need to do and build and work towards. So I don't think I really sit with that. I don't think I have the ability to really sit with that.
my follow-up, and I think you may have answered that in this question, was to ask how you then, as a leader, how do you inspire some of those other people who are kind of like, they stole our idea, Anisa, and they ripped us off, and and they want to kind of drop out and quit. How do you keep those people involved? How do you reach out to them and get them to stay with it when it looks and feels maybe like they're losing all the time?
Oh, I think that's when the other organizers I organize with get more fired up and more willing to work. It's like when we're in that venting process, like I'm doing these so many emails and I have a few people ready to call in Monday and all of that. Like I think that in itself, it's the idea of your own thoughts and stuff being taken away from you that kind of propels them to continue forth. And I don't think it's really exciting. It's more like a survival, like this is my mission and I need to see it through type of thing for them.
In terms of getting other young people involved in overcoming like a political apathy. I mean, from that level of political apathy all the way up to I'm going to show up, I'm going to be involved at every level of the campaign. How do you get other young people involved? Like, how do you get them to show up?
A lot of our organizing happens on Instagram and Twitter, to be honest. It's meeting people where they're already at. And a lot of the young individuals we're talking to, they're on Snapchat, they're on Instagram, on Twitter. And we see them make a post about like the school district and we literally direct message them. And then it's, do you want a Zoom call? I'm like, no, we prefer FaceTime. And it's like, that's how we've been building relationships and that's how we've been getting the youth involved. You get that a lot, that political app, like the youth just don't want to be involved, but it's, we're not meeting them where they're at. And as organizers, it's on us to meet them where they're at this point.
Okay, now that is, I think, a very interesting sort of like, I don't know, paradox dilemma, right? Like, and this isn't just about the youth. I know this was back in the early 2000s. I think the 2000 election. One of the critics pointed out that the winner of the 2000 election was none of the above, right? Like that more people stayed home on election day, and that's not necessarily apathy. That is a choice, right? Like you gave me a choice between, A and I chose something else, right? So young people maybe feel like their values aren't included, their interests aren't on the agenda. When they are, they're dropped all the way down to the end. And so they're like, why should I show up? Why should I participate? Right. But on the other hand, you have, it's like, well, the reason why we dropped your issues down onto the end is because we can't count on you to show up. Right. Like, how do we overcome that dilemma? Like, how do we get the people who are writing policy to respond to young people? And how do we get young people to flex their muscle? Is that?
Oh, that's a really good question. A lot of our organizing doesn't really have to do with like more of like the electoral politics aspect of it. I believe through our organizing, we were able to still push a lot of the school board members that are currently sitting on there. So we don't really approach it through electoral politics, like, oh, you need to vote, you need to do this, which is helpful, especially with the school board election coming up.
Yeah.
It's needed, but a lot of our organizers are current students, so they're not really at that point yet. So I don't know. But through the meetings we've had with school board members, I don't think voting is, well, obviously voting isn't the only tool, but I think we really don't really organize with electoral politics at this moment. So I don't have the best answer, but I do think I've seen a lot of youth push politicians, especially now, even politicians they themselves didn't vote for, or even when they didn't participate. So I think there's multiple ways of pushing them, and I don't know if voting is necessarily the only way. I struggle with that.
Yeah, let me kind of follow up, because I do think that was a very good answer, or at least to what I was kind of trying to get at. But to go a little bit deeper into it, how do, like, a lot of your people that you work with are under the age of 18. How do you respond to them when they say, well, I can't even vote anyway, so why should I care? Why should I get involved?
honestly, a lot of the individuals I currently work with know individuals who can vote in their family. And so they kind of utilize that to like, oh, like my parents are going to go vote for this and this person for school board and all of that stuff. But honestly, the individuals we work with, the students, I don't know, they're very self-aware. I myself wasn't at that age in 10th grade, but they know a lot about oppression, all of that, and how to work towards it. Like, I don't think they're very apathetic. Like, I think they're ready to go. They just know they can't utilize voting at this point.
Mhm.
And I haven't heard anyone speak about, I can't vote yet, so why should I care?
So that that stereotype of young people as apathetic, politically disconnected, you're not buying it. You don't think that's not your experience?
That's not my personal experience with the individuals I organize with, but going onto Twitter, I see that a lot. But honestly, I don't think it's them being apathetic. I think the individuals I follow on Twitter, it's them not utilizing electoral politics at all and organizing outside of that. Because like a lot of the amazing organizers I look up to don't participate in electoral politics. So it's very, and it's like they're not, I don't know if they're really apathetic. It's just, maybe they are, yeah, maybe they are, but I see them doing amazing stuff outside of that within, like I see them building community. I see them providing community support. I see them continuously organizing against the city or, well, they vote on the city level. I just don't see them voting federally.
Mhm. No, I think that there has historically been a and I'm like I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but like to minimize and downplay the efforts of young people in affecting change,
Yeah.
right? That I know that Nixon was terrified of the voting age dropping down to 18 because he was afraid that that gap between 18 and 21, that so many of them would be progressive voters. And that I think there has also, again, I think that if you look and kind of study it, you'll find that historically there's been an effort to suppress youth vote, and because of some of those same kind of efforts. Do you think that, but I mean, I think that the youth have always been and continue to be a really powerful force for progress and for change, and that their influence is felt in electoral politics, even if they're not like directly out there knocking on doors and raising votes. Do you think that, do you think everybody should vote? Do you think anybody should be staying home in this election? Is there a protest? Is there room for a protest vote in this election?
I um I think if you're able to, you should vote. I do see individuals questioning that as like people saying it's harm reduction. I do see people challenging that aspect. If you are able to, you should, but I'm not, I don't, I don't, I personally don't see that as a path of creating liberatory change, but that's just me personally. But I do believe that if you are able to, you should utilize that. Um, I'm more engaged on the local level than I really am on the federal level when it comes to like Congress and presidency and so forth. Like I'm more willing to like have that debacle like of how serious it is when it comes to the local level than I am on the federal level.
So, um, I've been asking a lot about youth because that's been one of our focus. I'm also going to talk a little bit about small towns here in a minute. But before we do that, one of the things that at least I think about when I do or work with any kind of demonstration, or I'm talking to anybody who's doing a protest, is that I'm this incredibly privileged person. You know what I mean? Like I have almost I always feel like I can walk up to a police officer and that he's never going to go for his revolver, right? Like that just doesn't happen because I am this very cisgender white male. Like I can kind of present myself anywhere. So I don't face a ton of either barriers to organizing and activism, and I don't face as much risk, I don't think, as a lot of other people. Um, what do you see as some of the biggest barriers to kind of entering into political activity for young people today? Like what scares them? What worries them? What keeps young people from doing more, being more engaged, more active?
I think it's just policy. Like I seen a lot of young individuals be very engaged when Bernie Sanders was running to be
Mhm.
president. It's like the values and the policies he had in place directly impacts young individuals. And then it's like, okay, two older white men who don't really have policies that will have impact us. Like I feel as though they're in the pockets of big corporations, and it's like, well, where do we really fit in? So I honestly think it's about how we have who the candidates are, and how do we get individuals who represent our ideals. Because I do see individuals, literally AOC and Ilhan Omar and all, like, oh yeah, we need to go vote, and then it's Joe Biden. It's like, oh, we need to go vote, you know.
I like that. I like that. A very performative distinction between the two different candidates. In terms of like being in a small town and being an organizer in a small community like Mankato, are there any like unique challenges that you feel like you come up against because you're in Mankato and not Minneapolis?
Where do I start? Yeah, I've seen a lot of pushback. I'm a Black Muslim woman. So when we were on the Free Press, it was like, oh, you guys are terrorists, you guys are this. Like it's a small town. They're not ready for the changes that we're asking for. And so we get attacked on our identities and so forth, and our race. But I also it's not it's not progressive at all, to be honest. I don't think Mankato is really progressive at all. But then yeah, it's pushback from community members, pushback from older Black community leaders who are like, we can't ask for this at this point, and push we're pushing back against the school district and the city. So it's like I'm receiving as a Black Muslim woman so much pushback from different sectors. I don't know where to pinpoint that, but it's like going a step forward and then being pushed 10 steps back. It's continuously going through those same feelings and same routines.
I really, you know, think that one thing that you've done, like with every time I ask you a question, Anisa, I think this is really very interesting. You always bring it back to local, right? Like we're demonstrating in Mankato because the issues we're dealing with are Mankato issues, right? We're not interested in how police treat people of color. We're interested in how Mankato public safety treats people in this community, right? And so, of course, that's why the demonstration has to be in this community because you're dealing with issues very directly in this community. And I think that the way that Ignite has kept the focus on that has been really, really important. Um, and really, I think I'm impressed. I just wanted to say that. I guess that there's no question there. I was just saying that I'm impressed by that. In terms of like to take it a little bit national, though, to look at national, and to think about some of the big issues. Do you think that, like, okay, I'm sorry, I'm rambling here. Let me be more specific. 20 years ago when I moved to Mankato, I could not have possibly imagined the kind of demonstrations that we were seeing in Mankato, you know, over this past summer. That was, to me, exciting and also very, very different, that this is a different community than it was 20 years ago. Do you think that that's a positive sign, that that's signs of change, or is that signs of resistance? More protests, signs of change, or signs of struggle? What's up?
I'd say both. I'd say signs of change by seeing how many white allies were there, but also signs of resistance by also seeing Black and brown youth resisting in that manner. I'd say it's a bit of both. It's change and it's resistance.
Mhm.
But I'd say it's more so change with the amount of individuals, especially white allies who are joining us in this fight, but resistance, the amount of times Black individuals are just resisting on their own, but then them showing up and resisting in this manner.
So what, let's talk about the role of white allies. What should the role of white allies be? And this is something that I'm asking you because I know you get asked all the time, and I think that I want you not just to answer the question, but I also want your reaction to the question. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Um, Me and my friend Jasmine were talking about it. The main signs of allies is you opening up your purse. We say that a lot, like donating to a lot of mutual aid projects and not like big nonprofit organizations. Donate to small organizations that you see asking for change. Not basing it off of your experience with the police officers. I see a lot of, I would expect it from right wings, but I see a lot of liberals doing that. Like, oh, our experience with the resource officers are amazing, and that kind of surprised me a little bit, not too much. But it's staying in the sidelines and not. I hear this a lot. Like, we have the same struggle with like white women saying that to me. Like, we need to fight this together and all of that. And it's like, no, we don't. Like, I need you to listen to me, and I'll tell you what I need from you. I don't want you to assume what role you're going to have, but I'm going to tell you what I need from you and when I need it. And so it's don't center whiteness, and that's very hard for white people to do. But don't center whiteness. And also, I struggle with the word ally because like I also think it's you trying to help me a little bit. I mentioned that discussing something with my friend Jasmine. It's I want you to continuously work to dismantle whiteness. Therefore, we would dismantle white supremacy and the world as we know it. Like, I need you to work every single day to dismantle your own whiteness and not
So,
give me a little bit.
so what do you say to and to that young person who shows up, right? Like, you've posted something on Instagram and people are coming together and they have never been to anything like this before. They've never, but they get out a piece of paper and a Sharpie and they show up and they hear a lot of stuff about whiteness and they just they don't know what to do. What should that person do? What should I tell that person when they're like, I went there and I didn't know what to do? What should I tell that person?
Hmm. Um, I would see with demonstrations, I usually have a call to action in the end, like what I need you to do. So I hope when you do attend protest, there is that call to action or some form of what to do next. But I also think it's very important for whoever organized it to always leave where they can find you at. Like, every time I speak, you can find us at Ignite the Youth, and we'll tell you where to go. Opening up Google is an amazing thing where you can search up local organizations and so forth. But I think it's that self-learning that you would have to task yourself to do after an event. But I hope there is a call to action. I hope there is someone dropping where they can find you at and where they can reach you if they do have those questions.
I always tell people, just keep coming back, and you're absolutely right. One thing that I can tell you, because I've been at a lot of demos, is when somebody does a demonstration and then at the end they're like, okay, bye. And it's like, so what am I supposed to do now? And I always do appreciate that, because if the demonstration should not be like the end of the activity. That's like part of how we try to make change, and it's connected to larger processes. And so to me, it's like, I understand, you just keep coming back. And I tried to tell, in particular, like some white progressive friends, is like, you should be uncomfortable. It's okay to be uncomfortable a little bit. It's okay, like, don't worry, but it's okay to feel a little uncomfortable with that kind of space. And that once you grow to kind of understand your discomfort, you're a little bit better for it. And to just keep showing up and keep asking what you can do, you can do to help. Do you feel like, even asking you to be here today is singling you out, right? And saying, okay, now you get to be this voice. Um, um, and I know you're not the voice for all young women, not all young women, Muslim women, right? Like that, you don't speak for everyone in that sense. How do you kind of manage that kind of responsibility of continually being asked to speak, though, on behalf of that? How do you deal with that?
I don't think I really process it.
Okay.
Like, I think I'm very on go a lot. Like, I'm always doing 10 different things at once that I don't have the time to like I don't know. Like, I don't want to, I see people tokenizing me,
Mhm.
and I don't know how to stop that. And I struggle with that a lot. It's something like people continuously coming back
Mhm.
asking me to do things. Oh, like you intersect on so many levels of this and this, like would you like to speak? And it's also for me, it's also on me to pass that down. Like, I always ask the student ambassadors, I ask other organizers that I'm organizing with, like, hey, do you mind tasking or responding to this or doing this call or this Zoom call and so forth. um, but I don't know how to stop that, and I also don't know how to respond to that.
Mhm.
It's me not knowing or not having the ability to have the agency over my own body to be like, okay, no, I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. And I also find myself picking up a million things because I don't know how to say no. And I struggle with that because when people are asking me for stuff, I don't know how to put my own needs in front of that. And it's like, okay, well, they're having issues with this organizing, so I need to go help them, and I need to go do this, and I need to go do this. I never have the chance to kind of sit with how people may be utilizing me in that manner. I struggle with that. I wish I had an answer for you, but I don't.
Well, I don't. I certainly don't have an answer for you. But it is very. I can tell you, it is a concern that when I, want to do things where I want to like help amplify voices of young leaders, that, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to call Anisa, right? Because she's the person that I see at all of these other events. And I know because we've studied it like at a university level that like young faculty of color, for example, find that they're tasked to do everything, right? Like they're on every diversity council, everything that has to do with race, they have to be involved. And that on one hand, it is that pull of passion, right? Like I want to be involved because these are the issues that matter to me. But on the other hand, right, like that kind of contribution fatigue, right, that comes along. And do you, where do you see yourself going, like in terms of like the next 5 years? Like, um, where do you see you taking yourself, and where do you see Ignite moving? I mean, let's assume you win your first victory. Let's assume you get police officers out of schools. Let's say you do that. What then comes next for you?
We're hoping next to focus on suspensions curriculum afterwards. It's like we kind of have plans as a group, but I'm only going to be here for like this semester. So I'm also kind of working with students that are in 10th grade to kind of pass it on to them and for them to carry it forward and utilize me as a point of contact when they need to. But it's kind of like the first step. It's like the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is like the policing, and then it's curriculum and suspensions and disciplinary practices that are utilized. I personally, beforehand, I really wanted to be a family lawyer, but so far I'm looking into changing it to civil rights attorney. But I would love to work at a nonprofit organization, like in housing, or I would love to be the individual that bails people out after protests. Like, I would love to do that for work. That's something that I want to do. I was looking more private practice, but now I want to do more into the nonprofit
Are
realm.
you, do you think that it is important to come back and practice in a community like Mankato? Or are you thinking that the someplace more like the cities is more for you?
Honestly, I before all of this organizing, I really wanted to come back to Mankato, but like it's traumatic now. Like I all the experiences, everything that I've gone through with organizing with Ignite the Youth, it's like I don't know if I really want to come back to this town. Possibly after the 3 years of law school, I might, but right now I'm looking into maybe focusing in Minneapolis and moving there. But like beforehand, I'm like, yeah, I want to come back to Mankato. And then after that, I'm like, yeah, it's very traumatizing currently living through and organizing at this moment.
Well, and I think that that is something that is, like a question that is uniquely asked of young leaders of color and young women of color like yourself, right? Like nobody asks me like, are you going to go back and represent your community? Like I get to move wherever I want, right? And I think you should also feel like you want to be the best that you can be. But I want to go back because I think that it is so brilliant, obviously, to be nurturing the next generation of leaders, for the next generation to say, like, I need to replace myself when I'm gone here so that my work doesn't, disappear behind me. My question is kind of a follow up on that, and I have it written down here. It's my last question that I had written down. What was that not everyone can be you. Okay, not everyone can be you. What do you say to young people who want to make change, who want to be involved? What should they do first? How should they start?
I think political education would be the first place. Like, I'm currently reading as I'm organizing, but I wish I had the opportunity to read and then utilize those tools. And then I would also say plug into local organizers that you may know, like see the work that's already being done. I know a lot of people don't feel comfortable being in the front lines, but there's so many places where you can be. Like, we have students who don't really want to, due to COVID reasons, they don't want to come
Yep.
out, but they're helping us digitally by putting up graphs and maps and all of this stuff and posting on our social media. So, like, there's so many places where you can plug in. I would say just find that place and plug in, because, like, there's so much that needs to be done, and not one individual can handle that. So see where you fit best, but do a lot of the reading. It's like, I'd say do a lot of the reading when it comes to organizing, and then
Who should they read? Who would you recommend they read? And I know that's like, if you're going to give them one book to read, Anisa, who would it be?
if I would give them just one, Um, I would say right now it'd be Prison by Any Other Names, and it touches on so many. It touches on child protective services, like how policing is so ingrained in our community, like
Mhm.
neighborhood watches and so forth. I'd say that's one book to tap into. It talks about schools and probation and all of that. So I'd start. I'd start there.
Okay. So, uh, in terms of like skills that you think young people should develop if they want to be active in their communities, like what skill? We have a lot of students that we're going to try to kind of shop. Like, if you're talking to a young student and they're like, I want to be an activist, I want to be a leader, what skills should they develop?
I'd say being able to work as a team, or like working as a community
Mhm.
better, like being able to work with other individuals, but also I like the skills that I would find important. Like, I don't know, I don't really want to be ableist in that manner, but I think
Yeah,
any skill that you think is best, we can find a way to utilize that. Like, I don't think there's
there
one,
you
like,
go.
you need to be really good with writing or communication. Like, there's a place for you. Just let me know what you think you're best at, and starting at that point.
Yeah, I have talked to other leaders before who said that a big part of their job is helping people really find what it is that they're good at. And a lot of people come thinking like, I'm really good at this. And it's like, no, let's find what you're good at. And that's a really, like, if you can tap into that skill, you're always going to have a leadership role in any organization. We're coming up very close to 3, and I wanted to see if there was any questions from anybody who is here. I found so much. I bet I could talk to Anisa for another hour, but I didn't. I didn't want to keep her too much past. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Hey, Jim, this is Jamil here. I just wanted to thank you and to thank Anisa on behalf of the Kessel Peace Institute, as well as the School of Communications, for putting this event together and for really a fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I just want to say real quick to your last point, I found that question about burnout to be especially uh, important, because as a Muslim faculty member, I'm always asked
Yeah.
to perform these sort of tasks, but I obviously have uh, it's hard to say no, and I
Yeah.
think that Anisa, you're really going to have to figure out a way to say no sometimes. But I think the work you're doing is fantastic. I had a question for you, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But a lot of people have asked me for guidance as to how to vote for school board this year. Are there any specific candidates that you would really want to talk up for that are running right now? You can pass on this question.
And I would love to. The first one would be Janet Megan. Her husband's a teacher at Mankato East, and he's been very helpful in helping us organize and speaking out as a faculty member. Habiba Rashid, she's amazing and does so much for the community. Abdi Sabri is currently the one championing us right now at the school board level, repping for us and amplifying our voices. So he's an amazing individual to continue to keep on. Kenneth Reed, obviously, a Mankato State faculty member. I know you can only choose 4, but also Aaron Roberts is amazing. So that's my 5. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, I've given very similar lists to people.
I saw that Professor Crone Mills had unmuted his mic. Did you have a question, Dan?
We can't hear you, Dan.
Yeah, he did
Still
unmute his
can't hear
mic, but yeah.
Sorry, I have a double mute system, which is a good safety precaution for me. Actually, I forgot the question, but give me a second. I can't remember. Sorry.
So I can probably put one more question out there, you know, as we're coming up, and maybe while Dan's thinking of his.
Yeah.
And this isn't necessarily, you know, for Anisa, but obviously you're our guest today, Anisa. In terms of like, what I'm trying to say is sort of like, who should young people like look at in terms of like heroes or examples? You know, like who inspires you when, like, in terms of like leaders? Like, who do you look at and say, you know, I wish I could be like that person?
Honestly, Miriam Kaba is like, oh my gosh. And my friends at Hamlin are interviewing her, having a panel with her in December. And I'm like so jealous. I'm like, how? But Miriam Kaba, she has her Twitter on private. And so like I've been like stalking. And then one time she made it public. I'm like, I'm following right away. But she is amazing. Obviously, Angela Davis would be another individual I look up to, who's very revolutionary. But the organizers in Atlanta are next level, like the young Black youth who are organizing out there. I'd say Deshaun Harrison, who's a writer up in Atlanta, T. Troutman, who's currently up at the U of M, who studies urban studies and like literally puts into perspective what a city is meant to do and how we need to look at the city itself. I would say those are the young individuals I look up to, as well as like the OGs of this fight, I'd say, that I look up to. It would be those 4.
Cool. That's really
I gotta say, Alyssa, just looking at your video behind you over the shoulder, I'm really impressed that you have your lists on the wall carefully highlighted, and then your post-it notes all carefully framed out, and then your inspirational quotes tucked over that. Well organized.
Thank you.
Well,
You should go see Jim's office on campus sometime for the diametric opposite.
No, that's honestly as organized as I can get. Otherwise, my whole life is all over the place. But yeah, post-it notes are amazing.
I was actually telling students just the other day, you know, when they're doing presentations, to start thinking of themselves as being, you know, like, you want people looking at you, not looking at yet your background. And at the same time that I'm telling them that, I have the most insane backgrounds. This is literally the only blank wall that I have, and I'm proud to show it off here.
Yeah.
You know, as we're approaching the 3 o'clock hour, I wanted to just thank everybody again for coming. And Anisa, we'd really probably like to have you back again sometime, maybe as part of a panel with some other young leaders in our community. But this is something that a lot of us, I know, feel like it's important to, you know, find spaces to amplify young leaders, leaders of color, people in our community who are out making a difference, and like to help serve maybe a little bit as inspirations for other people. So that, you know, I'd really love to have somebody in here in the future who'd say, you know, the person that I looked up to as a kid was Anisa Omar. And I think that there's going to be people who do that, Anisa. I really genuinely do. And so I want to thank you very much for coming. And if we can give Anisa a great big round of applause. And
Thank you.
all of us, All of us support you on your future endeavors. And to those of you who took time out of your afternoon, thanks so much for coming to enjoy us in this conversation. I hope that you all are walking away as inspired as I am. And I really, truly am. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
Did you see that there somebody had Yusuf had a question?
I did not. Oh, you know what? I did not see questions rolling into the chat there.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even look at the.
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah. Anisa, do we?
Yeah, and then
Okay.
also, hi, Kristen. Hi.
I'm
yeah.
sorry I'm taking a little bit of your time, Anisa. First of all, good luck, best of luck with your LSAT exam. Hopefully, you'll get into law school, whatever law school that you're aiming for. I mean, my question is a little broad. I did not know that we were on a time limit. I just wanted to know, like, what was your turning point, or like when you found out, like, because everybody, I feel like, has initiated at some point activism in his life. For me, I went to political science as well. You're a great inspiration. For me being a Palestinian refugee was my source of like activism, like, to fight for my people being oppressed in Palestine. Do you think that if you were like not a person of color, you would probably not be like as involved as you are today, or like for racial equity, or like, do you think that, what's the reason behind all this? Because I mean, not all of us have like the same common sense, like, yes, oh my, basic human rights, I want to defend basic human rights, I want to speak up for the unheard, or like, so what's your insight on this? Like, what was your turning point? Like, you wanted to be to fight and be an activist, Anisa?
Yeah. Honestly, I wasn't involved in the activist scene, but I was solely fighting so many oppressive systems on my own, where I kind of individualized everything. So I really wasn't advocating for anybody. Like, I was just trying to make it through. Also, capitalism, individualize everything. But it was me trying to get by and thinking of myself. But like, my parents are Somali refugees, and so they would always instill in me, always choose the collective over the individual. Honestly, if I wasn't a person of color, I doubt that I would be advocating. I really don't. I've never had that privilege to choose. But I think the turning point, honestly, it was Eid when I saw the video of George Floyd. Like, it was like the morning of or around Eid, and like my sleep schedule was all over because like fasting and everything. And I was just watching that video and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I couldn't look away from that. And so I was doing more activist work in the educational realm as opposed to criminal justice and so forth. But like, also, I would always try to separate the two, and knowing that they're kind of one and the same and how they interconnect. But I would say the turning point was, honestly, I was already doing all this organizing with the university, and then as my term ended, I started getting into the K through 12 school system. But I'd say what galvanized me truly would be that horrendous video that I was watching.
It was horrendous.
Right.
Thank you very much, Anisa, for answering my question. Thank you for being there. You are, and based on Jim, I do look up to Anisa, honestly. She's a great inspiration.
Thank you. He's an amazing classmate, helping me when I'm Thank you for that.
Thanks for being here, Yusuf. We're much appreciated. It's really great to see everybody who is just like even taking an interest in showing up to say, what do these folks have to say is an important part of the process. And so thanks for being here. Yeah.
Thank you so much for
Yep.
exciting.
Enjoyed every minute of it.
I don't want to cut anybody off if there are any other questions for Anisa, but I also don't want to keep somebody who is, studying for the LSAT, trying to graduate in December and carrying so much weight in the community to keep her here too long. But again, I can only say thank you so much, Anisa, and it's been such a great pleasure to have you here today. It's always great seeing you. I wish we didn't have to have so many demonstrations, but when we do, it's always nice to see you there. So thanks so much, everybody. And on behalf of both the School of Comm and the Kessel Peace Institute, I hope we can continue to do more of these.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yep. Bye-bye.